On this week's episode, I'm joined by Antonio Abreu. Antonio is an environmentalist, a biologist, an educator, a nature lover, and the UNESCO Chair on Biodiversity at the University of Coimbra. We discuss, amongst other things, the beauty and complexity of some of Portugal's landscape, the work Antonio is doing for UNESCO, and the importance of Biosphere Reserves for the future of our planet. Welcome back, or welcome to another episode of Portugal, The Simple Life, and I'm really excited to be joined here by Antonio Abreu. Antonio, thank you for being on the podcast, and how are you?
Thank you, Dylan. It's a great pleasure. I'm fine, and looking forward for this talk.
Yeah, I'm excited. It's a subject that we haven't had a lot of spoken a lot about on the podcast. So hopefully we're all going to learn something. So I'm excited. But why don't you just start off by telling us a little bit about you?
Okay, that's easy from my side. So I'm a Portuguese born in Madeira, some last century. I'm a biologist. My background is biology. So during my professional career, I started with teaching and doing some research, heading a natural history museum, then a marine biological station. Then I was in charge of the environmental sector in the government of Madeira during some times. But the last 20 or something years, most of my work is related with nature conservation, environmental management, and worked as consultant and officer for different organizations all over the world, especially in developing countries, where I did many, and I still do, some environmental and social management plans. So making sure that big investments and support takes in consideration environmental concerns and environmental opportunities and social too, and not just doing infrastructures that afterwards may bring some risks and situations. One of my key areas that I am still working on very actively is about developing protected areas, in the sense that mix not only nature conservation and biodiversity, but also how to find ways of bringing these sites as also pillars for the socio-economic development at local level. And particularly the model of the UNESCO Biosphere Reserves is the one that I am used. I worked also in Paris for UNESCO some years, until 2 years ago I was there. So managing and developing this kind of areas all over the world, and currently still doing part of that work. Currently I'm based in Lisbon, and I am a researcher and manager of a UNESCO chair at the University of Coimbra, well, precisely about biodiversity and conservation for sustainable development. So basically, this is. I love music, traveling, and sports for sure. So a normal person like anyone else.
Antonio, we have something in common. My first ever visit to Portugal was Madeira, Funchal. Yeah, so I mean, we've had a couple of guests on the podcast that are from awesome. There. Yeah, yes. But tell us about your Madeira and what it was like growing up there, and also how it influenced you to do what you do. It's a beautifully natural place.
Exactly.
But what do you want people to know about Madeira? What's special about it? And how did it influence you growing up and becoming the man that you are today?
Yeah, Madeira is, as we Madeirans say, it's a rock in the middle of the Atlantic, lost in the middle of the Atlantic. In fact, it doesn't matter what angle you use for understanding or trying to interact with Madeira. Well, there are many try to think about a volcano or a succession of volcanoes that one of these days they decided to be an island, and then how the natural communities get to the island established. So there's a long story of millions and millions of years that is fascinating, like for any other island. that brought to the island some animals, plants, and some were able to establish and to develop and to create such an amazing nature that we today consider very basic and fundamental for the development, the well-being and the way of being in Madeira. So, you know, Madeira, we live with the Atlantic for sure, and the ocean has an immense, it causes an immense fascination, imagination, fear, all kinds of feelings. But we have this mountain, so the rock and that green, especially from the laurel forest, with the walks, with the water, and you can imagine and look and try to have a flashback of how the humanized landscape evolved during years, especially during the 600 years. The first 500 and something years was without any technology, so adaptation, things that are typical and interesting, they represent a survival struggle. So when you consider all that and you mix, like making a punch, let's say a cocktail, you get trapped. So you are kidnapped and suddenly the island is the center of the universe. And this is an issue with good and bad things. So Madeira is a nice place, small, quiet, safe. So for people, it's amazing. You can skip from the sea to the mountain in less than half an hour. So quality of life is amazing because you can be swimming and half an hour later you are in the office. Then you can go lunch in a high mountain. Everything is closed. So, but you have access. So facilities, infrastructures now, not when I was young, it was not like that. I am from the time, so I'm getting that stage that when we finished the secondary school, summer holidays, traditionally me and some colleagues, we were around the island. That was more or less 1 week. You know Madeira, so now there's nothing that stays less than 1 hour. So can you imagine a week, an entire week to go around? And when you arrive at that time to Porto Muniz, or the northwest coast, you are sure that your parents were not controlling you because there were only 2 phones, one from the police station, so not desirable for you, and the other from the grocery. And grocery, after 2 days, you were already in debt, so no contact. So Madeira is a nice place, but also with the cosmopolitan way of being. So since centuries it was visited and continues to be visited. This contributed to a way of openness and understanding the diversity, that the world is really a mix of situations that I think sometimes that Madeira was able to capture and to learn from visitors and to incorporate the best of them into the lifestyle. So you see that in names, words that we use, like for the sidewalks, we use a French word, not used in Portugal. We say trottoirio, say trottoir, sidewalk, but also other names that shows that Madeira is open. And for sure, from the biological point of view, it's a living laboratory full of species and ecosystems that are unique, endemic, fragile. So a good model for understanding how life works and how human interaction with nature works. So a good spot. That for sure we love. It's our homeland. And well, we have also this way of welcoming. So Madeira is really open to anyone that visits. And I think you felt that once you meet someone from there, and if you go on a social event, for sure you will receive immediately 3-4 invitations for the next day to have dinner at someone's house. So that is also part of the way of being Madeira, which is of course a special side of Portugal, because in general Portugal is the same, so everywhere.
It was the first place that I kind of learned that when you're invited for lunch, it's not just for an hour. You know, it's it's, book out the rest of the afternoon, and that's your day done. But yeah, the hospitality is amazing. It's something
coffee, which is something. If you meet someone, immediately a coffee, or if you need to talk with someone, or even if it is a more serious thing, you say, okay, we need to have a coffee. So that is part of the lifestyle, but also lunch is an institution. So that thing of grabbing a sandwich and that's it. No. We either go home for lunch and see it. For instance, with our kids, I have a son. I remember that we insisted to go home for lunch during the lunchtime in school, because that is a good moment of being together and breaking the activity and some energy, and to fix some things for the rest of the day and for the next days. So it's an institution, and for sure, if there is something that a Madeiran likes, is to be at the table, eating and talking.
Yeah, well, in Portugal, it's
in general, of course.
Yeah, but now you have something that happens outside your house in Madeira, or where your house is in Madeira, that's completely unique to Portugal. Some guys come past your house in strange boxes. Tell us a little bit about the toboggan.
This is the famous toboggan from Mont. Mont is a neighborhood, literally mount. So I am original from that neighborhood, because the hospital at the time we were of my generation, everybody is from that neighborhood. But it coincides that I live there currently. And in fact, Mont is a very interesting neighborhood because it has a lot of history. So it was an emperor of Austria still there. So during the 19th century, 18th and 19th century, it was the place where many foreign houses and quintas, so nice houses, were established, especially for British, because when they were coming back from South Africa or India, it happened that staying in Madeira was part of the circuit, so acclimatizing before getting back to England. At the same time, during the 19th century, this was the place where sick people getting tuberculosis was advised to go and to stay. So this is a nice forest and romantic gardens, a lot of nice buildings and houses. And as it is 400 meters above sea level, but less than 3 kilometers from the sea. And so there is a track that once was a train track. So there was a train in the past that led from Funchal to Terreiro do Luta, so from 0 to 800 and something meters, with a mid-station, intermediate station at Mont. And currently this is used by these toboggans. So it's a sort of share with two, like a ski, and you get seated and there are two crazy guys driving you from behind. So they run, they push, they need to have a good synchronization and balance, and it's an adventure. So it was considered, I think, by CNN or I don't know who recently, as the most strange and crazy transportation in the world. So, and it happens that currently there is more cars than in the past, and I have to cross with them, literally crossing. So, and exactly that, those 200, 300 meters that I cross with the guys, sometimes 10 passing by, we automatically drive like yourself, like the British people. So I tend to go on the left because the inclination is more favorable for them to come there. So, and you notice who is from there and from not from there by these tricks. But it is a crazy situation. There are a lot of nice YouTube videos on that. So if you want to laugh a little and to test some adrenaline, it's mandatory. So you must do it if you are in Madeira.
We had a guest on the podcast, Joe Fattorini. He's a wine journalist from the UK, and he went to Madeira, and one of those things he did was the toboggans.
For sure.
And it's so funny to watch, because I remember doing that my first trip to Madeira. But I mean, we could do a whole episode about Madeira. There's so many things that I remember. I remember thinking, how did people get to their houses? Because you've got these houses that are on these mountains and on the side of cliffs, and just carrying your shopping. I mean, how do you carry your shopping from the road to the house? Things like this. I can't even imagine without the roads. So what you grew up with must have been amazing.
Yes. Yeah. If you look now, okay, you see the roads. That's why we have different ways of speaking. So even in Funchal, Funchal, there's that bay, but if you look to the mountains, you have small rivers, but very deep. So you can have your neighbor on the other side, let's say 100 meters from you, but with 600 meters between you depth. So this was isolation. So islands within the island, and life was not connected as it was. The hotel zone, like Lido, or
yes,
yeah, that was the winter place for people going on holidays from Funchal, because there were 2 rivers to cross, and that was not really something easy. So isolation, self-sufficiency, and the struggle to fight against topography. For instance, you see the terraces where there is some farming, agriculture. There was no soil, so the terraces were built rock by rock, so those walls, and then the soil was carried on the back of people uphill until 400, 600 meters to fill those wells with and now it's part of the landscape. But when you look that and you don't know the story, and that there was no technology, so that was an immense. In my point of view, from my personal point of view, I consider that a major sculpture, collective sculpture, so an installation, let's say, that today has a great value for the landscape. Yeah. It should be preserved. I think we need to pay some attention, because now, farming is not competitive. It's no longer necessary to live from, let's say, 1 by 2 meters. Sometimes that was enough to feed a family. Today, you can't compete with your lifestyle. You will not survive if you have that plot, even producing a lot, because the supermarket is more competitive than you. So, but we need to keep that as a memory, and also to prevent risks, to prevent erosion. And also it can be used for, let's say, ecological restoration, decoration, and landscape producing. So there's a lot of challenges.
I mean, I remember visiting the island the first time, and my parents saying, because I visited them on the island, and them saying to me, you look at the terraced land, and at that time I was a young adult, and I didn't really care about the world, and I didn't put value into what it was. But going back now, because I went back this year, and I was blown away by the topography and what people were able to achieve with no technology. And that was going to be my question: was, do these terraced farm areas help with preventing floods and landslides and things like that? Does it help to prevent those things from happening on the island?
A lot. If you look back to 2010 and February, the 20th of February, when we had those flash floods, you see precisely that those areas that were abandoned or not used or maintained by people, as well as the natural forest, that is also good, the best protection. So these sites that were abandoned are more easy to collapse and to induce risks, material and life. So yes, keeping landscape. We did a study some years ago that maybe the economic value and the services of keeping the human landscape is more beneficial from these situations like risk prevention, tourism quality, providing unique landscapes than from the agriculture itself. So it's a win-win. The issue here, and I think it's not only in Madeira, is how to pay for this.
Yep.
Because you pay for a kilo of potatoes or tomatoes or sugarcane, but you don't pay. There's no, let's say, market mechanism, or we need a society decision in order to make sure that those that build and keep landscape, whether natural or humanized, should get income from that, because they are contributing for a lot of services. Okay, this can be done by public departments, but the issue is that land in Madeira is mostly private, small, and most of the times, even when the government wants to buy land, it's very difficult to find the owners, because, you know, Madeira is an immigrant. And sometimes we have 20 owners of a plot with less than 1,000 square meters. So getting an agreement from all of them and the amount that you will receive, so it's really complicated. We had a project some years ago, between 2001, and I think it's still alive, that is try to buy all the land immediately after the last house on top. Because, you know, Funchal is growing, the houses are each time higher because it's less expensive, but at the same time, can you imagine how to provide water facilities, waste collection, energy with that land use and that way of because Madeira is differently from mainland, where here you have this sense of village. There it's different. You build a road and then you have houses along that road. So it's very rare to find a village in the sense that you go on a road and find a place, simply because we don't have land. So the island is 750 square kilometers. Most of it is mountains, so flat land. That's why we have that airport built on top of the water. So if you consider the available land for human activities and then put the human demography, Madeira has probably higher density than Mumbai. That's it. So, but we don't realize that, because you look, you see the mountains, most of the area is empty. You see some density of houses in Funchal, some villages. But if you do a proper calculation, the available and suitable area for human settlements and activities, it's really, really, really small, and that brings density as higher than Mumbai. So this is crazy, but sometimes I had to explain that to Brussels, to the European Commission, to justify the costs of waste collection or water, because just gravity doesn't work. The water is below, so you need to pump, you need to design the systems in a way to adapt to these conditions. So it's crazy. So it's a challenge. But when we are just tourists or normal citizens, we don't have to.
We don't think about those things. Incredible. I didn't think about it in that way, but now that you say it, it makes perfect sense when you consider how much of the area of the island is actually livable.
And we have incredible. And we have Porto Santo with 4,000 inhabitants normally, but in summer 30,000 or more. Can you imagine what kind of water? And they don't have water, so it's desalinated. But water, wastewater, and waste in Porto Santo, 4,000 inhabitants, but during 3 or 4 months you have 30,000. You need to design a system that is able to deal with this. Otherwise, you get a mess. It's quite complicated. Per capita is the most expensive site in the world for water, let's say.
Antonio, first things first, for people that don't know, when we talk about a biosphere zone, what is that?
Biosphere Reserve UNESCO Biosphere Reserve are sites that are designated by UNESCO, and they need to fulfill certain conditions. So UNESCO normally designates three kind of classification: World Heritage, so that is mostly for cultural or natural aspects, so outstanding and unique of universal value. Then you have geoparks, so for geological features, and you have this program called Man and Biosphere that designates sites called UNESCO Biosphere Reserves that are sites that combine nature conservation, so ensure that ecosystems and biodiversity are properly working and preserved, but also finding ways of supporting socioeconomic development. So it's not about a pristine area that nobody lives or with a lot of restrictions. Of course, you can have a part of a biosphere reserve like that, but it must include human activities around. So this is a program that started 50 years ago. And when we look back, it was very, let's say, visionary, because in fact, the concept that is behind this is what we call now currently sustainable development. How to bring back humans and nature together in order to benefit and to use nature in favor of a socioeconomic and cultural development of the communities, and bringing them in a way that respecting nature, it's not just an intangible thing, but also understanding that any euro that you invest in nature conservation, it will give you back on your economy too. So these sites are outstanding. Normally, they are really linked with tourism for sure, because landscapes and nature is attractive but it's also, the biosphere reserves have an obligation to work as a living laboratory for testing new approaches of dealing with the challenges of climate change, of nature conservation, or creating opportunities for youngs, and how to combine even scientific disciplines that traditionally are separated, like cultural or social sciences with natural sciences. Now here they should be linked. There are more than 700 UNESCO Biosphere Reserves in 129 countries. The leader currently is Spain, with more than 50 biosphere reserves. Portugal is not bad. It has currently 12, and some of them are transborder, so combined with Spain. And this is a way of also promoting peace, cooperation. It's not the case between Portugal and Spain, but for instance, I worked on a biosphere reserve that is able to join enemies like Boko Haram and the Cameroon, the Anglophone section of Cameroon, Congo, Chad, and other countries that are normally, in war, and they are together working to save and to ensure sustainability and resilience to the communities that live and depend on the Lake Chad. So these are wonderful sites, but normally they are not still well known of the people, because this is normally and traditionally something that is more of the knowledge of the managers or scientists. So the idea now is to create ways of communicating and spreading this, and show to people that there are places where we can test things that then we can transfer into other sites.
Well, first of all, I'm going to have to edit the part of this podcast where Spain beat Portugal, because it's not allowed on the podcast. So I have to edit that part out. No, I'm joking. Problem. But what I'm curious about is maybe you can use one of the biosphere reserves that we have in Portugal as an example. How does this practically work, that a biosphere can function in the way that you've described, with benefiting it from a socioeconomic, from a environmental, etc.? How does that practically work out?
Okay, let me give you an example. Santana, Madeira, So there's a whole municipality that apply to be a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve. So they have the conservation function related with the coastal area, where they have this natural reserve of Rocha do Navio, a marine reserve. Then they have the laurel forest and the mountains with Natura 2000 and the natural park. So for this, the Biosphere Reserve is promoting and attracting international researchers that are investing in knowledge about local and endemic species, and with that providing information for the managers to better understand and protect the species. One of the species that is under this protection is an endangered seabird that only nests in the mountains of Madeira. It's called Zinus petrel. It's a petrel, but only a few dozens of couples. It was considered extinct until 68, last century. Then it was rediscovered, and now it's through the protection of the habitats, they are really expanding and getting out of the category of endangered. And why I'm using this species? Because currently there is a few youngsters that build up some tourism companies that are offering this unique experience of listening to this unique bird. It is quite an experience because they live in the sea. They just come to land for nesting, breeding. So they drill some holes in the ground in the higher mountains, but you don't see them because only at night they sing. And there are, let's say, dozens of tourists that are able to pay 10,000 euro for a week to go there, getting real cold because the season and the mountains are cold sometimes. And this is providing jobs, economy, and support to the conservation. This is one. The other one is that the hotels in Santana, which is a very rural and not so modern neighborhood or municipality, they decided to adopt this model of Biosphere Reserve and promoting themselves as, come, stay with us, stay in a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve. At the same time, the Biosphere Reserve promoted a project about implementing best practices and authenticity. So all the hotels, restaurants that voluntarily wanted to enter into this program, they were invited to promote a menu based on local production. And then the Biosphere Reserve introduced some best practices to the farmers, to the small individual farmers, most of them very old people that once they do farming, not as competitive producers, but just for subsistency, but the remains are made available together and then incorporate this chain. Then the menu is offered to visitors, whether locals or tourists, as the biosphere menu. So by doing this, the income, but also attracting some youngsters to enter into farming, because they don't need to produce massively, because you know the world is small now. To be competitive, you need to be, and Madeira is not competitive. We have good products, but the cost of transportation, the distance to the big markets, it makes the things not competitive. But when you consider that you have 2 million visitors, if every visitor was able to use and to try a menu based on local products that, by the way, are produced under best practices, it's a win-win for everybody, because you improve the environment, the use of water and the inputs for farming. So you improve the quality of the product, you keep tradition and the traditional products and tastes and the gastronomy, and then you can tell this story to the tourists. And then there is a group that the Biosphere Reserve invited of youngsters that are telling about this, or the menus have this information. So what you have here immediately a cluster of actors all in tune under the same sustainable, let's say, vision. adding value to the local economy, and at local level, this may have an impact. So suddenly we were talking about nature conservation, and we are talking about economy and keeping tradition and identity and promoting, let's say, this sense of being proud. So this is a way of showing that when you interact based on nature conservation, you are also promoting your lifestyle, your quality, your products, your identity, and you are sharing that with people, sharing in a way that doesn't change. So this is a different way of doing, let's say, tourism, for instance, without the challenge and the problems that we tend to use nowadays about transformation and sending people away because tourism is inducing some impact. So this is a balanced way that demonstrates that you can do things, and combining different things like tourism with nature conservation, income, jobs, youngsters, and things like that. Even the taxi drivers, they wanted to have this logo of certified by the Biosphere Reserve. And of course, there is the branding of UNESCO, which has some power on communicating. The taxi drivers, we discussed with them, what can we do in order for you to get this? Because you are a taxi driver, you have a driver. And he said, I can reduce the water, I can use better fuel, I can drive in a decent way, I can learn, and I can talk about this to the clients. So this was a way. When you do this, especially when considering tourism, and you are able to communicate this to the market, let's say to the trade, tourism trade, you are also attracting a different or a specific niche of clients. And these are also clients that demand less water, they behave better in respect with the environment, with the social specificities. So you are combining and offering a unique experience that is about to. The hotels are the same everywhere. So Hilton in Lisbon is the same as in Nairobi. What makes the difference for a client, for a tourist to choose which destination? It's not about the hotel. The hotel is the same. It's about nature and people. So if you invest holidays, it's a big investment. So what makes you decide? And if you know that there is a biosphere reserve, so a place where you can find some of these things, why not? So this is a way of becoming more attractive. Of course, there's a lot of greenwashing too and risks of that, but being part of this club, it involves also monitoring and external evaluation that makes sure that you are on track. Otherwise, you can get rid of that.
This is really, really responsible tourism.
Yes, it is sustainable tourism when considering sustainable as also responsible.
I mean, we connected on LinkedIn not long ago. That's how I first started to read and hear about Biosphere Reserves. I was quite impressed that there's 12 in Portugal. If you consider the size of the country and you look down the list of how many exist in other countries, and in some countries substantially larger than Portugal, and Portugal has more. So this is telling. I think this is telling into what we generally try to do here as a society. There's one near to where I live, the Berlengas Islands. Have you been?
Yes.
Amazing.
Berlengas and Peniche. So Berlengas is the motto, but well, in fact, there is a story about that. The first time Portugal tried to nominate and submit the application of Berlengas, it was not approved by UNESCO, precisely because there's no people there. And for this problem, you need to have nature and people. So the second time, they extended the original application, including the city of Peniche, which is also part of that. Yes, it's an amazing site. And they are doing a good job. In fact, it is, it's making this year the first 10 years of that Biosphere Reserve, together with Santana in Madeira, that are now under evaluation. So these months, maybe next week, UNESCO will make the assessment and the evaluation of the work that they did during the first 10 years. So it's also part of the process, and they are a little bit nervous about the result. But that is part of the process and very interesting. But the first biosphere reserve in Portugal was Paul do Boquilobo 40 years ago. It is one of the first generation.
Say that name again, Antonio, and where is it?
Paul do Boquilobo. It's somewhere between Torres Vedras and Torres Novas and Golegan.
Okay.
Where you have the horses.
Yeah, Golegan. I've been there. It's amazing.
It's a
wetland. It's very low.
It's a wetland.
On the water table, very flat.
Exactly.
Lots
in
of maize.
winter, it's full of water, and it's also part of the Ramsar Convention, that is a wetlands international convention, and it's the oldest. Recently, let's say 5-10 years ago, they had to change and to expand the Biosphere Reserve due to the changes within the program, so demanding more human activity and not only nature. So that is our father of the Biosphere Reserves, or mother of the Portuguese Biosphere Reserves.
Wow.
The Azores, they have 4.
Yes.
Yeah, the whole island of São Jorge, the whole island of Corvo, Graciosa, and Flores, they are Biosphere Reserves. Madeira with Santana, but also Porto Santo Island, last year was nominated. So it's the whole island and the surrounding sea. Then you have Castro Verde in Alentejo, and you have the Douro Internacional, Tejo Internacional, Meseta Ibérica, that is the biggest biosphere reserve. It comes from Bragança up to Guarda almost. And Jerez.
Jerez is shared a bit with Spain, isn't it?
Yes.
If I remember correctly.
Meseta Ibérica and Tejo Internacional are shared with Spain.
It's the only time that we like to share with Spain.
Yeah,
it's the only time that we'd like to share here. I mean, what are the principles that we're learning from these, and how and what are we looking to do with what we're learning from these biosphere zones, and why is this so important today?
Because today we understand, finally, we understand that we are just a species, another species in this small planet. And that small planet is something, recent understanding that during many, many centuries or thousands of years, the planet was big enough or with enough resources for humans. But technology allowed us, and knowledge allowed us to manage the world in a different way. And suddenly, since the Industrial Revolution, technology induces not only an explosion, a demographic explosion, but also the understanding that if we continue with this model, with this sustainable or development model, we don't have resources enough for at least to have let's say, a fair and just way of living. Just to tell you a figure that is really scary, is that if you combine all the Chinese population, so the numbers, and the India population together, if they use the same amount on average of water that we use in the Western world, let's say, do you know for how much it will take to finish the available sweet water, let's say, in the planet?
I'm too scared to guess.
Can you guess?
5 years?
5 years, okay, that can be optimistic, but it will be less than 3 seconds. This is the figure, so yes.
Wow.
And when you have this figure with you, well, I mean available, there's water in the planet, of course, but the cost of turning available for use, we don't have. That's why we don't have people having access to natural resources. So when you consider about this, and when you consider this figure, and there are a few others that we should use more often, then you understand that when talking about justice and no one left behind, it's something that we are still far. So the idea here is that all the big problems, all the global problems are the result of each individual action, of course, some more than others. So maybe it's the time to turn back and to see what each of us can do to improve. It's not going back to the caves or going back and abandon the benefits of knowledge and technology. No, let's keep it. And even if possible, to improve and to be more efficient. That's the concept of circular economy, but it's not enough. So if we need to live in a just and equitable world, we need to better manage the resources. And the resources are limited. There's only one planet. If you want to feed people, you need nitrogen to do agriculture. And the stock of nitrogen is finite in the planet. So whether you improve efficiency or find new technologies, or there will be people starving, as we have. We tend to be shocked with the images of a small boat bringing illegal immigrants into the European coast. Okay, that is shocking. But do you have an idea of how many people, how many millions of people are running and putting away from their places due to lack of human resource, of natural resources and environmental situations? Poverty, in fact, it is an environmental issue. It's not an economic issue. So biosphere reserves are trying to demonstrate, not by dream and not as a philosophy, it's not about that, of course, you can have your philosophy, but by practical demonstration that it is possible to do better. We have limitations, but we can use better and we can share knowledge. I have problems that I solved. I can share the solution with you. You have the same problems. The cost of trying to invent a new solution or not sharing this solution with you. And this can be for farming, for water use, for energy, for waste management, for nature conservation. So we need to make sure that we have 30% of the world under a natural stage, which means that we need to restore natural systems. It's not about just protecting or making a decree, but how can we work on restoration, ecological restoration, because we need the ecosystems, because with the ecosystems properly working, we will have not only materials that we need for our life, but also functions like water purification, climate regulation. So it's not only building infrastructures and installing machines that we will have the planet working, because we need nature, because we are part of it. And that's what biosphere reserves are requested to do.
Wow, this has been so fascinating and eye-opening. Thank you, Antonio. What is one thing that you want people to remember and take away from our conversation?
That it is possible to do a better world, but not by just talking, by doing. So it's part of us. In the end of the day, it's us, each individual, that can make the difference. When you decide to buy that brand and not that brand, or this shoe and not that boot, okay, it's about you. And the best way is to go and live, travel, visit, learn, be open-minded, and why not starting a journey and making in your plan to, every time you go on holidays, try to visit the Biosphere Reserve to see if they are doing something or not. If they are not doing, please call the attention and help them to do better. So this can be something for starting to learn and to explore this amazing world of Biosphere Reserves. Some are inactive, but some are really outstanding. Everywhere in the world, you can go to the UNESCO website, find one, go and visit. Well, but my advice is start by Portuguese Biosphere Reserves if you are here.
I agree. Antonio, how can people follow you online, learn more about what you're doing, and be kept up to date with your work?
Yeah, the projects that I'm engaged in many projects. In fact, I have a project in South Sudan to do the first biosphere reserve in this country. and I'm working with UNESCO for this project and the government of Sudan and other partners. For the Portuguese Biosphere Reserves, we have a website and a project that started almost a year, still starting, and until 2023. There will be a lot of information, but we have our social media channels already available, as well as a website, so reservas de biosfera.pt. Have a look. And myself, I have a Facebook page and a LinkedIn, but more as a tool for learning, and not so active to showcase, well, from time to time. But my email, I read all my emails every day, any message that comes in. That's why we are talking now here. I reply, so Twitter and so on. So we are fully available, and any entry is useful. It doesn't matter when or where.
Okay, wonderful. I'm going to put links in the show notes of the podcast so that people can follow, can learn, can be in touch and help where they can. Antonio, a question that we ask all of our guests: Portugal, the simple life. Why?
Because life should be simple. That's life.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Antonio. This has been such an interesting conversation. Thank you so much. And thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you. Congratulations for your work, and thank you for this opportunity. It was a great pleasure. I believe that we will meet one of these days live and even improve our experience.
I'd like that. I'd like to do that.
A lunch at minimum.
Yes, at least. I'm going to let you call it.
That's a wrap.
So thank you once again to Antonio, and thank you to all of you for listening. Please subscribe, share with your friends, give us a thumbs up, and please leave a comment or a review. We'd love to hear from you. And as we say in Portugal, um abraço. Welcome to the simple life.